Hello class. Today we're talking about noob traps. If you're not familiar with the term, this basically means some strategy, Pokemon, item, or move that new players think is great, but is actually pretty bad and is probably hurting their chances of winning. But before we get into that, let me tell you a short story. Something you may not suspect about me is that I used to be rather bad at competitive Pokemon. I couldn't get out of the 1200s. And in this period of time, and still today, my favorite part of the game was team building, but back then, I knew my teams were bad. Whenever a high ladder player took the time to help me with my team, I was really happy. They always managed to make my team way better, and I could feel the difference on the ladder. I vowed that if I ever became a high ladder player, I'd make myself available to help inexperienced players, so others could feel the joy that I felt, of seeing your idea for a team become refined and polished. Now, today, as an experienced player, I've been sent hundreds of replays and well over 1,000 teams to review, most of which are from relatively inexperienced players. And after reviewing all these teams and replays and having conversations with the players who sent them, I've noticed some traps that new players fall into, both in team building and in battling. And a lot of these traps I remember being ensnared in myself. In this video, I'll go over the 10 most common noob traps that newer players fall into. For each, I'll go over why they seem appealing and why, in reality, they're pretty garbage. I'll be focusing on Scarlet and Violet Overused for examples, the main format for competitive Pokemon singles, but a lot of these noob traps enthrall players across many formats. Our first noob trap is the item Shell Bell. The Shell Bell, at first glance, is an amazing item. It causes you to restore health based on how much damage you deal to the opponent. Basically, it turns every single move into a draining move. Imagine your Darkrai healing whenever it clicks Dark Pulse, or your Raging Bolt healing when it uses Draco Meteor. It's no wonder that a lot of less experienced players throw this item onto their Pokemon. The problem is in the details. The Shell Bell heals 1/8 of the damage you deal to your opponent. This is pretty terrible. For reference, most healing moves restore 50% of the damage dealt, and Draining Kiss restores 75% of the damage dealt. So 1/8 or 12.5% is pretty terrible. That means if you're holding a Shell Bell and you one-hit KO a Pokemon with the same HP as your own Pokemon, you'll only heal 12.5%. That's the same as 2 turns of leftovers. The second problem is, what kind of Pokemon would actually want to run this item, if you really think about it? Certainly no defensive Pokemon. No bulky Pokemon deals enough damage to make this worthwhile, they'd rather run leftovers. No breaker is going to want to run this, they'd rather run items that boost their power, like a Choice Band or Choice Specs, or a specific type boosting item, and actually help them break. No breaker is so strong that it doesn't need a power boost. How about a sweeper? Once again, no. It may seem appealing to boost up your stats and then heal as you deal damage to the opponent, but even for sweepers, leftovers is almost always a better option. That also provides you with healing as you boost your stats up, not just when you start attacking. And a lot of other sweepers would rather use an item that helps them achieve a kill that they wouldn't get otherwise. Sure, your Shell Smash Cloyster could run a Shell Bell to heal a bit off of the damage you get when you get a kill, or you could run a Never Melt Ice and get a lot of KOs that you didn't get before. For almost every single Pokemon I'm aware of, there is a better option than Shell Bell. Maybe a Pokemon theoretically with extremely low HP and extremely high defenses could make good use of it, but no such min-maxed Pokemon exists at the moment. Now, do correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, though. I'd be intrigued to hear if there was some rare instance of Shell Bell usage in some wacky format I've probably never heard of. But as far as I know, there is only one niche use of Shell Bell. It revolves around using an extremely low-level Pokemon with Endeavor and Sturdy. In this team, I have a level 2 Sudowoodo. The idea is that you can use Endeavor to bring your opponent to an extremely low percentage of their health, and then they'll die to sand chip damage. And if your opponent attacks you, you'll survive thanks to Sturdy, and Endeavor will do so much damage relative to your level 2 HP that the Shell Bell will heal you to full, and you can repeat the process, restoring Sturdy. This strategy is totally shut down by any ghost type, which is immune to Endeavor, but if you get lucky and your opponent doesn't have any ghost types, or they get careless and let their ghost type die, this gimmicky strategy can be very effective. It's definitely not good at a high level though. It's a funny strategy, but nothing more than a silly gimmick. Now let's move on to the second noob trap, Sticky Web. Now, I know what you're thinking, but pink across, isn't Sticky Web pretty good? And yes, it is. Sticky Web is a viable archetype at a top level. It's a great move. Slowing down your opponent's Pokemon eliminates a lot of counterplay to some of the tier's most powerful threats. It's no wonder this archetype has hit rank 1 on the ladder so many times. The noob trap part of Sticky Web is that less experienced players try to put Sticky Web on way more teams than it belongs. Sticky Web teams are a trade-off. The reason is that no Sticky Web setters are very good. In the Overused tier, the best 2 Sticky Web setters, Ribombee and Araquanid, are pretty terrible Pokemon if they didn't have Sticky Web. That's not to say they can't contribute to the game or have good matchups, but almost nobody would use them if they didn't get Sticky Web. So, to run this archetype, you need to use a bad Pokemon, but the trade-off is worth it. That is, if your other team members utilize Sticky Web well enough. This is where new players have issues. Almost every Pokemon appreciates Sticky Web. Your opponent being slower is a good thing 99% of the time. So a ton of new players get the idea that the answer to making their favorite Pokemon work is adding Sticky Web. Hisuian Arcanine's a bit slow? Sticky Web. Heracross keeps getting out its bed? Sticky Web. Nasty Plot Hoopa Unbound keeps getting revenge killed? Sticky Web. I'll say it again. Almost every single Pokemon appreciates Sticky Web being on the opposing side of the field. But a Pokemon appreciating Sticky Web doesn't mean it should be on a Sticky Web team. It needs to appreciate Sticky Web enough that it's worth running a Ribombee, Araquanid, Smeargle, or something like that. And most of the things newer players put on Sticky Web teams just aren't worth it. Hisuian Arcanine, for example, is a viable Pokemon and overused, at least in my opinion. But I don't think Sticky Web is the way to do it. It's just not a good enough abuser to justify a team slot on a Sticky Web team. The way to make Hisuian Arcanine work involves pivots to help bring it in, and great hazard control so it can run a choice band and not worry about hazards. These are difficult things to add to a team. It's a difficult structure to build. It's very easy to say, hey, this Pokemon is kind of slow, let me put it on a Sticky Web team. So Sticky Web becomes a crutch for a lot of new players. So next time you want to put something on a Sticky Web team, try and look at some of the top performing Sticky Web abusers in the metagame and ask yourself if you can really justify using this off-meta pick. Sometimes the answer is yes, but more often it's no. The next noob trap is the item Eviolite. This boosts the defense and special defense of non-fully evolved Pokemon by 1.5 times, with no drawback at all. If this item could apply to fully evolved Pokemon, it would undoubtedly be the absolute best item in the game. As it is, this item is so strong that it often leads to pre-evolutions having superior defenses to their final evolved forms. The most notable example, Chansey with Eviolite, is way bulkier than Blissey. Porygon 2 is bulkier than Porygon Z even without an Eviolite, but with an Eviolite it becomes insanely bulky. In lower tiers and other formats, Pokemon like Dusclops and Murkrow also use the Eviolite. On the previously mentioned Pokemon, the Eviolite works well. The noob trap comes in when newer players conclude that just because a pre-evolution is defensively superior to its evolution with Eviolite, that means that pre-evolved form with Eviolite is better, or viable. Eviolite Bisharp, for example, is bulkier than Kingambit, on both the physical and special side. But you should never use it. Not only does it have lower attack, and lack the Supreme Overlord ability, as well as Kowtow Cleave, you don't get an item. This is the biggest issue with Eviolite. If you run it, you can't run a different item. The value of an item slot is absolutely massive. Even if the pre-evolution has noticeably better defenses, it's probably not the right move. The evolved form will often have better attack and speed, and with its item slot available, it almost always outperforms the pre-evolution. So unless you're dealing with one of the rare cases like Chansey, think twice before putting an Eviolite on some random second stage evolution. The next noob trap is a move, Brick Break. I've had so many new players send me teams where their Kingambit, Rillaboom, Ceruledge, and more have Brick Break. Brick Break is a 75 base power fighting move, it makes contact, and it has one secondary effect, destroying screens. This secondary effect is certainly why so many less experienced players love it. They run into a dual screens or Aurora Veil team, get destroyed by a sweeper, they say never again, and slap Brick Break onto something. And so many Pokemon learn Brick Break that something already on the team will almost certainly have access to it. It seems like an elegant solution. Tack on a coverage move and solve a problematic matchup. But in reality, this often isn't a good idea. First of all, Brick Break is just not a very good move. The Pokemon I most commonly see Brick Break on, Kingambit, has far better options like Iron Head and Low Kick. Sure, Brick Break will be nice against Screens teams, but that's going to be at most 1 in 5 games. In those other 4 games, your Kingambit will be lacking in power and missing out on kills. The reason this is such an appealing fix to new players is that it's simple. You have issues with Screens teams, add a move that gets rid of Screens. And for some reason, almost everything learns it. There are other, better countermeasures to Screens teams that don't sacrifice your matchups in the other 80% of games, though. Phasing with Whirlwind and Roar, unaware Pokemon that ignore setup, moves like Taunt and Encore to deny or force the opponent to continue setting up, and help stall out Screens turns, Haze to remove stat boosts, tricking choice items to lock Pokemon into setup moves behind Screens, and more. The problem with these fixes is that they're hard to implement and often involve rebuilding your team. Slapping Brick Break onto your Galarian Slowking is very easy to implement, but if you're having issues with Screens teams, I'd urge you, before you put Brick Break on something random, ask yourself if there's a way you can restructure the team to improve your matchup against Screens without sacrificing the effectiveness of one of your sets. I should also mention Psychic Fangs. I don't see this nearly as often as Brick Break since far fewer Pokemon get it, but it similarly has a screen-destroying effect, and some people will throw it on places it doesn't belong for the same reasons. Our next noob trap is an item, the Life Orb. This was considered a great item back in the day, but the Life Orb has really fallen out of favor in recent generations. It seems great at first to get a 1.3 times boost to all attacks, but the 10% damage per attack that comes off is just really rough. As the metagame has become optimized, people have realized that there are better options for almost everything. Now, some things definitely should still run Life Orb. Cerulege is great at using Life Orb. It gets awesome kills with Life Orb Terrago Shadow Sneak at +2, and it can often heal off the Life Orb recoil with its signature move Bitter Blade. Some mixed attackers like Iron Valiant can also use Life Orb very well. The fact that Life Orb boosts physical and special attacks is a major benefit that puts it ahead of Choice Band or Choice Specs on some threats. Rillaboom heals off a lot of the Life Orb chip with grassy terrain, making it not as big of a deal. And Pokemon with Sheer Force and Magic Guard don't take Life Orb recoil, making it a great choice on Pokemon with these abilities. But a lot of new players put a Life Orb on any offensive Pokemon. This item is not great, and you should be careful putting it onto any Pokemon that's going to actually end up taking recoil. If you're not sure if an offensive Pokemon should have a Life Orb or not, try testing out different items and see which gives you the best performance. In most cases, the Life Orb just isn't it. Before I continue, if you're enjoying the video so far, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps out a lot. Now for the next noob trap, it's another move, Belly Drum. Belly Drum is awesome, I get it. Boosting attack to absolute full is an extremely appealing idea, and most Pokemon that get this move utilize it at least sometimes. But it has serious flaws. The obvious one is just having the HP of the user. This can be offset by a Healing Berry, but that not only takes up an item slot, this HP having also makes it so that you can't set up more than once in most games. Still, to a lot of newer players, this sounds like a worthy trade-off. After all, what can stop a Pokemon with +6 attack? Well, the problem is, a lot can. Newer players often think in terms of what is going to be able to take attacks from this Pokemon once it sets up. And the answer in the case of Belly Drum is not much, pretty much just unaware Pokemon, but there are still lots of ways to stop Belly Drum sweepers without having to eat their attacks. Priority and just faster Pokemon can outspeed and revenge kill the Belly Drum user. Now, some Belly Drum Pokemon have priority of their own, but those that do are often quite slow and vulnerable to faster priority. Worst of all, offensive pressure is usually a very effective tactic to shut down Belly Drum. Very few Pokemon get the move Belly Drum, so experienced players will usually see it coming, and a combination of entry hazards and placing the right Pokemon on the field at the right time will often make it so that you can never set Belly Drum up, or if you do, you're at such low health that your sweep will end almost instantly. Belly Drum is extremely effective in lower ladder, but as your opponents become more competent, this move falls off in a major way. I'm not saying you should never use Belly Drum Pokemon, merely that you should be aware of its limitations and prepare for the common counterplay. On the right team, Belly Drum sweepers can be very effective, but newer players often use Belly Drum far too often and with far too little support. This belly drum discussion segues well into the next noob trap: setup moves. Now, once again, yes, of course, setup moves are amazing and a ton of Pokemon use them well at a top level. The problem is that a lot of new players use setup on every single Pokemon that gets it. Using a Garganacl, it has to be Curse. Galarian Slowking, it's gotta be Nasty Plot. Iron Valiant, Swords Dance or Calm Mind. A new player might not see the value in a Choice Specs on an Iron Valiant. After all, why use a Choice Specs when you can just use Calm Mind and get a 1.5 special attack boost that the Choice Specs would have given, and a 1.5 times special defense boost? Why use a Choice Band on Dragonite when you could just use Dragon Dance? This addiction to setup moves makes sense. A Choice Band Dragonite almost never goes crazy and sweeps a whole team like a Dragon Dance Dragonite often does. This leads many less experienced players to falsely conclude that setup sets are simply better in general. Even on teams where setup doesn't fit, new players will often cram in random inconsistent setup sweepers. Many even consider a setup sweeper to be a crucial component of a team, like, oh, you need a Stealth Rock setter, priority, and electric immunity, and, oh yeah, a setup sweeper. This isn't the case at all. Not every team needs a setup sweeper. What set to run on a Pokemon depends on the surrounding team and the archetype, but generally speaking, if your team generates faster games, it's more likely that a setup variant will be good, and if your team generates longer games, it's more likely that a non-setup variant will be good. This is not a hard rule, and there are tons of exceptions though. If in doubt, test several variants and see which works better, and try to note its average performance. Don't be dazzled by the 1 in 4 games where the setup sweeper goes crazy. Try to look at how much value both sets are providing consistently. The next noob trap I want to discuss are high power, low accuracy moves. Moves like Magma Storm, Focus Blast, Blizzard, Hurricane, Thunder, Hydro Pump, and such. These moves are sometimes a good idea, and sometimes it's the only real option. Gholdengo doesn't get Aura Sphere, so if you want to hit Kingambit, you need Focus Blast. Heatran with Magma Storm can be a very effective stall breaker. No other fire move is going to do what Magma Storm does. Zapdos basically needs to run Hurricane to have a flying stab, unless you want to run Air Cutter, which is weak and terrible, just over half the base power of Hurricane. But there are some times where you do have options. Lots of water types get Hydro Pump and Surf. Lots of Pokemon got Aura Sphere and Focus Blast. And which to choose isn't always obvious. It depends on how strong that Pokemon is, how often the higher base power move would lead to a kill that the lower base power move wouldn't achieve, whether or not your team is counting on that Pokemon to reliably make progress, or if your team can afford a more hit or miss Pokemon. There's no easy way to decide. Checking usage stats and seeing what high ladder players run more often is usually a good method, but it really comes down to your specific team. So what's the noob trap aspect of this? Well, a lot of newer players default to the higher power option every time, without considering any of the aforementioned factors, sometimes even to a ridiculous degree, like using Thunder on a Raging Bolt outside of Rain instead of Thunderbolt. And it makes sense why this happens. Bigger numbers seem better. And also, higher power moves are often learned later in-game, making them seem more valuable and better to someone new to the competitive scene. Pikachu learns Thunderbolt at level 25 and Thunder at level 40. But in reality, the expected value of Thunderbolt is significantly higher when you factor in how often Thunder misses. I've also seen some new players go the other way entirely. They have the perception that they're extremely unlucky and always run the lower power move. They never use Hurricane or Focus Blast on anything, even opting to use comically weak moves to avoid inaccuracy. I've seen Air/Tornadus in low ladder before. If you're a newer player, consider whether the stronger or weaker option fits better with your team, and if you're unsure, check usage stats and try testing both versions on the ladder. But don't just default to one or the other, especially if your default is going with the high power option. The last two noob traps we have are a bit different. They're things that newer players absolutely should use that are great, but they often don't. The first is entry hazards. In competitive singles, entry hazards are amazing. In particular, Stealth Rock is almost mandatory on every team. If your team doesn't have Stealth Rock, it's probably bad. And a ton of newer players have sent me teams without Stealth Rock. I've also worked with a lot of newer players that will use a team that has a Stealth Rock setter, but they'll hardly ever click the move in battles. And it makes sense why. The move does nothing right away, and since most hazard-weak Pokemon are equipped with heavy-duty boots, it probably won't ever do significant damage in the game. To less experienced players, clicking an attack now usually seems like a better deal than setting up an entry hazard. But at a top level, you'll notice players sacrificing an entire Pokemon to set or remove hazards. There are two big reasons why entry hazards are so good. The first one is obvious, that it racks up damage over the course of the game. The second and less obvious one is that it discourages and punishes switching. Switching is an incredible tool, particularly in competitive singles, and if entry hazards are on your opponent's side but not your own, you can switch around to counter their Pokemon, but if they try to do the same to you, it'll probably result in them losing the game long term. This kind of offensive pressure is often invisible to less experienced players. Even if they understand the hazard chip does stack up over the game, they probably won't see the benefit in how hazards force their opponent to play differently. So if you're a newer player that finds yourself not using entry hazards that often, here's my advice to you. Start setting entry hazards as early as you conveniently can in a game, and watch your elo increase. Even if you don't fully understand why hazards are helping you win games, keep using them and you'll eventually learn to utilize them to their full potential. Now for the last noob trap. A lot of newer players have a visceral opposition to legendary Pokemon and sometimes top tier Pokemon in general. I'll start by addressing legendaries. In-game, legendaries usually seem broken. They have good stats, strong moves, and you often capture them at a high level. And their rarity, the fact that you only get one per game, makes them seem more valuable. But in competitive play, the distinction of legendary is completely meaningless. Sure, Zamazenta is a top tier and overused, but Deoxys Defense doesn't even get enough usage to be in the rarely used tier. Garganacl is more of a legendary than many legendaries, at least if we're going off power. My advice to new players on this matter is just to stop caring about this as quickly as possible. Avoiding adding legendary Pokemon to your team because they seem cheap is just going to limit your team building. Similarly, stacking your team with nothing but legendaries is probably going to lead to a poorly built team. Now, as for avoiding top tiers, a lot of new players instantly hate what they perceive as the best Pokemon in the format. In Overused, that's going to usually manifest as a hatred of Great Tusk, Kingambit, and Gholdengo. They think these Pokemon are broken, avoid using them, and sometimes even look down on others for using them. Ironically, these are often the players that want to make their favorite Pokemon work, usually some very low-tier Pokemon that they used in-game or just really like. And I say ironically because if you want to make very low-tier Pokemon work in a tier like Overused, top tiers like Great Tusk and Kingambit are your best friends. Top tiers usually aren't top tiers just because they're powerful offensive threats. They also provide a lot of utility to a team. Great Tusk, for example, provides removal, entry hazards, and an immunity to electric, as well as a dark resist, it's a great physical wall, and even a physical breaker at times. A lot of lower tier Pokemon fulfill very few roles, making them difficult to fit onto teams. But if they do have a chance of working, it'll probably be because they're paired with Pokemon like Great Tusk. So if you're determined to make your favorite Pokemon work in Overused, despite being in the zero used tier, don't hate Great Tusk. Great Tusk is your strongest ally in making niche, rarely seen Pokemon work. Furthermore, competitive Pokemon is, after all, competitive. I can get hating the top tiers in a poorly balanced shooter game where an optimal team build is running the entire metagame and it's executed the same way every time, but in a game as complicated as Pokemon, even top tiers have lots of variety. Especially with Terra, there are dozens of different sets you can use on your Kingambit, and hundreds you can use on your Great Tusk. So if you're a newer player that resists using top tiers, I'd highly suggest you give them a try. They're top tiers for a reason, and they often enable creativity, not restrict it. Well, those are the top 10 noob traps I've seen. Let me know in the comments if you think there are any I missed. Do you know of any other move strategies, Pokemon, or items that new players think are amazing but really aren't? If I see some good ones, I might make a part 2. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. Well, that's all. Class dismissed.